Governor Jelly Belly was on with our friend Brett Baer, a special report yesterday as he's making the rounds, continuing to pitch his wares. He wants to make sure that the base of his party understands that he is the most reckless, irresponsible, and hysterical critic of President Trump. He wants that sash because he thinks that's the path to the nomination in 28. It's the path to re-election for governor and the path to the nomination for president in 28. That's what he thinks. But, you know, he also wants to present as reasonable, particularly when he's in a forum like he was earlier this week, the Economic Club of Chicago, where you can't, you know, completely howl at the moon. You can run some of your rap, but, for example, he's not going to run his I believe that this whole Trump operation is part of a larger conspiracy to get the military into cities like Chicago for the purposes of stealing ballot boxes come next year and rigging the election, which is really literally what he says. But unless Brett Baer brings it up, he's not going to. He wants to sound more reasonable. And this is a good example of what I'm talking about.
It seems like I live, rent-free in his head. He talks about me all the time, just spontaneously. And all I can say is that we're having to deal with the invasion of his ICE agents, his CBP agents, and potentially of federalized National Guard who don't know anything about law enforcement. We could use help. By the way, I'd love to get help with law enforcement. FBI, ATF, DEA. We want to get gangs and guns and drugs off the streets. And we've asked for that kind of help. But instead, he's talking about sending troops. Why? Why?
Why? Well, because the Chicago police, who are down 2,000 officers, issued a stand-down order when ICE agents were in trouble the other week. Remember? That's why. Why? Because Illinois State Police, to their credit, cleared a path for ICE vehicles to get in and out of that federal facility in Broadview the other week. And you don't want law enforcement at the state and local level helping ICE, you and your buddy BJ. That's why. But, it's subtle, right? He gets the invasion shot in there to signal to his neo-Marxist base. But then, of course, I want federal law enforcement to help with dealing with gangs and drugs. Not really. It's just something he says. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Mark Krikorian. He is the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
You've been watching this activity in Chicago, which is sort of a, proxy for what's going on nationally in terms of the political and actual literal fights between ICE and state and local politicians and their supporters. Well, what's your perspective on our leaders, JB and BJ, and what's going on in Chicago?
Well, this is, when I was in school and studying the history of the Civil War, this is basically what South Carolina was doing. Nullification of federal law and attempting to create, provocations for the federal government to try to enforce the rules, and they don't want that. So, and the ironic thing is, these guys are basically playing the role of a kind of neo-Confederate nullification role, and there's just no excuse for it. And they can say what they want about this is the interest of Chicago or Cook County or Illinois. I mean, I don't think that's true, but it doesn't matter, because if illegal immigrants come into the United States or are able to stay in the United States, they can go anywhere. So this isn't just their business. This is everybody's business. It's a federal issue, and it matters what people in Maine and Alabama and Montana think about what people are doing with regard to immigration in Chicago.
Are you satisfied with the sort of 70-30 split that is been the statistic that's been bandied about by Tom Homan and Pam Bondi and others. 70% of those apprehended by ICE are people in this country with a criminal conviction other than being here illegally and or facing criminal charges. And by definition, the other 30% that have been apprehended and removed for deportation proceedings don't fit that description. So ostensibly, there's a lot of people, an insular minority, but still a lot of people in the aggregate that have been apprehended just for being in this country illegally. And the criticism from the left, which is the focus was supposed to be strictly on public safety threats, not somebody who's been here for 20 years and is working and contributing, and his only crime was the misdemeanor crossing the border illegally. And that wasn't supposed to be the focus. And if that wasn't happening and the focus was just on public safety threats, we'd have a lot less acrimony. What do you say to that?
Well, there's a couple things. First of all, every illegal alien is deportable every minute they're here. So it's just an issue of resources and priority. The second point is that almost every illegal immigrant has actually violated a whole slew of other federal criminal laws other than sneaking across the border illegally. And a lot of illegal immigrants came in legally on a visa and then just never left. So they didn't commit that crime. But tax fraud, ID fraud, if they're working, also perjury, because you have to sign that I-9 form when you get a job and show your ID. You're signing that on pain of perjury. There's a whole list of federal crimes. So it's not just, they crossed the border illegally and that's the end of it. And then the final thing is that percentage that you said, 70% roughly are somehow involved in crime and 30% aren't of the ones that get arrested. That actually would be higher if Chicago were not a sanctuary city, because then ICE would be in the jails and they would have their hands full processing all of the dirtbags that the police arrest just for normal police reasons. Drunk driving, drug dealing, wife beating, all of that stuff. The cops arrest illegal immigrants every day. If they weren't a sanctuary city, ICE would be able to be in there, take custody of the people that the city or county didn't want to prosecute, or if they did prosecute, when they were finished with them, they would hand them over to ICE, and they wouldn't be doing these kind of street arrests because they wouldn't have to go looking for people. Essentially the normal work of the police would be bringing a huge number of illegal immigrants to them kind of on a platter.
let me give you a real case, a tough case. I give you the easy one so far, and I'm going to give you a tough one. Ruben Torres Maldonado. He's a painter that was detained by ICE this past weekend at a Home Depot in northwest suburban Niles, just northwest of Chicago. Lived in the U.S. since 2003. Working, he was a painter, hawking for jobs at Home Depot. And he has a 16-year-old daughter named Ophelia who has a rare form of cancer, stage 4. Take a listen.
This is 16-year-old Ophelia Torres and her dad, Ruben Torres Maldonado. She had just came home from Lurie Children's Hospital, still fighting a rare and aggressive form of stage 4 cancer. The next day, ICE arrested him. He's been held in Broadview since Saturday, waiting for his first court hearing. No calls, no visits. His family hasn't heard his voice since. His wife says time is something they do not have.
Yesterday, my daughter had a breakdown. She was crying for hours, and she's like, "Mom, I know that I should be calm because cancer feeds from those feelings. Cancer cells are like, I have to be calm in order for them not to reproduce, but this is so hard."
ICE picked him up outside of a Home Depot in Niles while he was doing weekend painting jobs to help pay her medical bills. His lawyers say 4 masked agents surrounded his car and took him at gunpoint. Ruban's lived in Chicago since 2003 after entering the country without inspection, raising 2 U.S.-born kids in Portage Park. ICE claims he has habitual driving offenses, but his lawyer calls them minor tickets. The agency hasn't said why he was targeted that day.
And one more voice here. I mean, this is sort of undermines the case. I don't know why she wants to. Well, I do know why she wants to insert herself. But Delia Ramirez, who's a congresswoman and an open borders demagogue.
They should be together right now. But instead, Ruben became another person taken by this rogue agency. Ruben was taken and putting his family through the pain and stress and fear of separation is not making anyone safer.
No, I mean, we can easily dismiss the politician as the barbarian that she is, but the family, what do you say to that circumstance, that father, in that, with those extenuating circumstances?
I mean, it's a terrible thing, obviously. But first of all, illegal immigrants don't get to stay because, they have a compelling story for a family member. This guy has gotten away with his violation of the laws of the American people for 20 years. You get away, if you rob a bank and nobody finds you for 20 years, you still robbed the bank. You don't get to keep the money. This kind of situation is always difficult, but the fact is she has another parent who's able to care for her, and unwinding 20, 30, 40 years of willful ignoring of immigration laws is going to inconvenience people.
Yeah,
it's going to be unpleasant because these situations have been allowed to develop. They never should have. And when you pull the plug on this, or let me put it this way, rip off the Band-Aid, it's going to cause some pain. There's no way around that.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's sort of maybe part of my answer is that they have put us, the open borders crowd and the politicians and their terrible public policies and their turning a blind eye to law enforcement have put the law-abiding in this position, and they're not the good guys and we're not the bad guys. It's actually the converse. You've made the position impossible. You've put these families in a precarious position, and you knew you were doing it. And you did it for political reasons. And now we're here to try to, restore order, and we're the bad guys. But the one other thing I would say is, look, you heard it in the report. Of course, nobody focuses on the process. They just focus on the sentimentality. But so he's in custody, but he has a hearing. I think he had a hearing yesterday, according to that report from earlier in the week. And so, I mean, if I'm an immigration judge, I mean, you can temper justice with mercy. Say, look,
sure.
I'll make a special dispensation for you to be with your family and your daughter, to care for your daughter and to be with her in these conditions and to make sure she has access to the sort of exigent care that she needs access to that she probably wouldn't get, Children's Lurie Hospital quality in their home country, whatever that is. I don't even know. But understand that, you're on the way out at some point, and have a check-ins or something like that, and you violate a check-in, then you're gone. So something like that where you can provide some, and this is where, human discernment comes in. You can provide some, relief without undermining ultimately the rule of law and what has to happen.
This is why immigration judges are allowed to release people on bond on some circumstances. Some people are not allowed to release on bond, but they can. And if I had to guess, I think that's what happened here, and they'd give them like an ankle monitor or something like that to keep track of them. But, you raise a point about discretion, basically. In other words, people in authority being able to exercise a little discretion when you need, when the law needs a little wiggle room. That's necessary. The problem is that all of our institutions related to immigration, whether it's immigration judges or others, have abused that discretion for decades. And so people are right to be suspicious when somebody says, okay, well, this person deserves a little bit of flexibility. And the answer, the first reaction from a lot of people is, well, this flexibility turns into basically ignoring the law when it's flexible for everybody all the time. So we need discretion, we need wiggle room in the law, but we also need people exercising that discretion who believe in enforcement of the law and not using discretion as a way to undermine.
Yeah. No, you're right. Of course you're right. And it's really interesting, too. Earlier this week, Pritzker talked about, we had a border crisis. This was at the Economic Club of Chicago, where he had to pretend to be, generally reasonable, which he's not. But we had this border security problem. Now we don't. And then he goes on saying, so we don't need ICE and this and that. So, but he never explained when we had this border problem and why we don't anymore. I thought that was very interesting. It's just, we had a problem and somehow it just magically went away. Of course, because he doesn't want to address it, because he was on the wrong side of that border problem that we had that is now gone away, that he's using the Trump administration's actual good work to secure our border to address the problem he was party to. And now he's using that to say, well, this is why we don't need ICE enforcement at the, state and local level.
And he's standing in the way of undoing what that 4 years of Biden disaster created. Biden ended up letting in, either affirmatively, just on purpose letting in, or looking the other way, something like 10, 11, maybe 12 million people who had no right to be here. Well, it seems like the Trump administration has a responsibility to try to undo as much of that as possible, and that is what this in the city and the county and state are, not just here, obviously, but in Los Angeles and Portland and elsewhere, are trying to stop. They're saying it's a sort of ratchet effect. Okay, Biden was bad, his policies were bad, but everybody who got in under his policies gets to stay anyway. And that can't be allowed.
Right. Mark Krikorian is the Executive Director, Center for Immigration Studies. Mark, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Mark joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show